Have you ever met someone and formed an immediate opinion about them without knowing their story? What if you found out later that you were completely, devastatingly wrong? Imagine a quiet woman named Sarah, a waitress with kind eyes and a sleeve that always covered her left arm, a secret she guarded with a fierce desperation. To the world, she was just the scar girl, a ghost in a faded uniform, invisible in a crowded diner. But beneath the surface, behind the scars and the silence, lay a story of sacrifice, courage, and a past she had painstakingly tried to bury. A story that would, in one single moment, shatter the judgment of an entire town. Don't let the scar girl touch my food. The words cut through the hum of the crowded diner, sharp and merciless, hanging in the air like a slap. Sarah Jones, 34, flinched without looking up. Her head stayed low as if pressed down by invisible hands, and she tugged at her long sleeve, hiding the burn scars that climbed up her left arm. The air seemed to tighten around her as laughter rippled from a nearby table. A teenager at the corner booth lifted his phone, the glassy click of the camera faint but cruelly loud in Sarah's ears. Somewhere in the din, a whisper floated by, casual and venomous. Probably got those messing around with something she shouldn't have. Sarah kept moving, carrying a steaming coffee pot like it was the only anchor keeping her standing. As she leaned over a table to refill mugs, a low, gruff voice cut across the room. "Where'd you get that tattoo?" Heads turned, forks paused midair. For a second, the clatter and chatter of the Highway 29 diner faltered, like the building itself was holding its breath. The diner on a Sunday morning was always its own kind of chaos, a messy orchestra of human life. The air was thick with the greasy perfume of bacon and eggs, underscored by the stale edge of burnt coffee. Plates clattered against formica. Ceramic mugs landed with soft, dull thuds. From the counter, an old radio tried to lighten the room with a bouncy country song that felt painfully out of place. Every corner was packed. Families in crisp church clothes tucked into pancakes and sausage links. Truckers leaned heavy against the counter, shoulders stooped from hours on the road. A cluster of teenagers lounged in a booth, nursing milkshakes and boredom like it was a sport. Through it all wove Sarah Jones, almost invisible in her faded waitress uniform. She'd perfected invisibility over the years. Her short brown hair was always neat, but her body folded in on itself, shoulders hunched as if apologizing for existing. Her gaze stayed pinned to the black and white checkerboard floor, and her left arm never strayed far from her side. That arm, wrapped in its thin shield of fabric, was the secret she guarded with the kind of vigilance born from years of being stared at, whispered about, and photographed when she wasn't looking. The humiliation, when it came, was sudden and merciless. Table 4, a man in his 40s, neat shirt tucked in like he dressed for a job interview, shoved his plate away in a gesture of disgust that was almost theatrical. "Don't let the scar girl touch my food," he said, loud enough for the entire diner to hear. The cheerful murmur of the room shattered. ISIS, dozens of them, maybe 100, pivoted towards Sarah, pinning her in place like a trapped animal under a spotlight. Heat surged up her neck, a familiar choking shame that burned worse than the scars themselves. In the corner, the teenagers cracked up, laughter sharp as broken glass. At another table, a young woman leaned toward her friend, voice pitched to carry. "Ugh, people like that totally ruin your appetite." Sarah's lips pressed into a bloodless line. She didn't answer. She never did. Her hands shook as she gripped a rag and moved to an empty table, scrubbing at a perfectly clean spot just to keep moving, to keep breathing. Her left arm stayed clamped against her body, her shield, her prison. But the attack wasn't done. The teenage boy, drunk on the thrill of cruelty, raised his phone again. The quick flash of his camera, small, almost imperceptible, was a slap all its own. Somewhere, probably within minutes, her image would be smeared across local high school group chats with a caption like, "Horror movie waitress, LOL." She wasn't a person anymore. She was an exhibit, a joke. Her hands, slick with sweat, trembled as she reached for a tray stacked with empty glasses. The weight shifted wrong, her grip failed, and the tray went sideways. The crash was explosive, glass shattering, silverware clanging against tile. Gasps shot through the room, a reflexive chorus of startlement. Sarah dropped to her knees immediately, scrambling to gather the shards, heart pounding in her throat. In her haste, the cuff of her sleeve caught on a jagged edge. It slid down past her elbow. The diner went silent. The fluorescent lights left no mercy. Her arm lay exposed, a chaotic map of scar tissue, angry red and pale pink, shiny in some places, knotted in others. It was the kind of damage that made people look away even when they didn't want to. But among the burns and twisted skin, just above her wrist, was a black ink tattoo, clean, deliberate, and defiant. A shield split by a lightning bolt, its lines sharp despite fading over time. Inside it, in blocky letters that had survived the fire, were the characters. Delta 113, the air froze. Every eye seemed to land on that arm, that tattoo, that impossible contrast of ruin and resilience. Then, just as quickly, heads jerked away, throats cleared, forks scraped against plates again. Life in the diner stuttered forward, but slower, heavier, like everyone was pretending they hadn't just witnessed a small, private death. From the dimmest corner of the room, a man watched. He sat alone, an older figure with silver hair and a face weathered by years most people couldn't imagine. His eyes stayed fixed on Sarah and on the story written across her arm. The man in the worn army green jacket hadn't looked away for a single second. His coffee sat untouched, steam curling into the stale diner air. He leaned forward, elbows braced against the table, eyes narrowing as the world beyond his focus blurred into nothing. He wasn't staring at the scars, not really. His gaze locked onto the tattoo etched into her damaged skin, and something flickered in his expression. A raw, ancient ache that twisted behind his disbelief. No one else in that cramped little diner knew the truth. Sarah Jones's past was another country, a sun-seared wasteland of memories she refused to cross. Once she had been Specialist Jones, a combat medic whose hands now considered too unsightly to even serve food, had once moved with calm, practiced urgency. Those hands had packed bloody wounds with gauze in the suffocating heat of a Humvee. They had started IV lines while the vehicle lurched over cratered dirt roads. They had held trembling boys as they died under the Afghan sun, whispering for mothers who would never hear them. Her unit, Delta Company, 1st Battalion, 13th Infantry Regiment, Delta 113, had been more than a military unit. It was her world, her family. A family forged not by blood, but by dust, fear, and an unbreakable loyalty that didn't need words. And like dust, that family had scattered one blinding afternoon, ripped apart by the roar of an IED that swallowed the lead patrol vehicle whole. Sarah had survived only by chance. She was dragged from the second truck's smoking wreckage, her arms shredded by fire and shrapnel, alive but barely. But most of the people she loved were gone in that instant. The Army sent her home with an honorable discharge, a Purple Heart she tucked into a shoebox under her bed, and a map of scars that screamed a story she refused to let her lips form. She returned to her hometown not as a hero, but as a ghost wandering familiar streets that no longer recognized her. Her mother had died years earlier. Her father's health was a cruel, slow collapse, a chain of illnesses held at bay only by a small fortune in prescription pills. So Sarah worked. She took whatever job she could find, keeping her veteran status locked behind the same iron wall that guarded the memory of her fallen brothers. The diner was just another hiding place, another quiet corner where she could earn enough to cover her father's medications and exist without truly being seen. Silence was her shield. It was her camouflage in a civilian world that spoke a language she no longer understood. But today that shield was failing. Humiliation thick in the air. Sandy, the manager, a tired woman in her 50s with quick feet and a quicker temper, hurried toward the man at table 4. Instead of standing up for her employee, she bent close to the customer, voice dropping into a whisper that still carried across the room, sharp as a slap. "I'm so sorry about that. Honestly, she's lucky we even gave her this job, you know." Her eyes flicked, just for a heartbeat, toward a faded photograph tucked beside the cash register. A young man in an immaculate Army uniform, smiling like a memory that hurt to hold. For a fleeting second, her face hardened, the pain behind it mistaken for some cold justification. The digital mockery outside the diner walls was spreading. A teenager had posted about the scarred waitress on the local high school forum. By now, it had mutated into a poll. Sarah the waitress, tragic war hero or trashy drama? Vote now. The weight of invisible eyes became unbearable. Sarah retreated into the cramped, cluttered stockroom, pretending to search for napkins. Her forehead pressed against the cool metal shelving as her breath stuttered. The freezer's low hum blurred into ghost sounds, the crackle of a radio, the far-off thumping of helicopter blades cutting through Afghan heat. Her hand clutched her ruined arm, not from shame, but from a pain older than the scars, the kind that never leaves. She inhaled, steadying herself, and when she walked back into the diner, her face was a smooth, unreadable mask once more. That was when Emily appeared. 17, all timid nerves and curiosity, the intern had once kept her distance from the scarred waitress. But she had seen things, small, quiet gestures Sarah never announced, slipping muffins to a homeless man who lingered near the back alley, covering the cost of an elderly couple's meal without a word. Those moments cracked open the girl's fear, replacing it with something like awe. She approached as Sarah methodically refilled salt shakers, voice barely above a whisper. "Miss Sarah?" Sarah paused, her hands stilled, but she didn't turn. For a long, heavy moment, Emily thought Sarah wouldn't answer at all. Then when the silence had stretched so thin it might snap, Sarah's voice slipped out, a fragile whisper, trembling under the weight of an ocean of grief she hadn't spoken aloud in years. "It just reminds me of a family I lost," she said, and the words seemed to pull the air out of the room. The quiet broke with a sudden, jarring crash. A coffee mug met its saucer with a loud, decisive thud that rang like a gunshot in the small diner. All heads turned. It was Frank. He shoved his chair back, the scrape of wood against the linoleum shrieking through the hush, slicing through the remaining whispers like a blade. When he spoke, his voice was rough with age but carried an undeniable authority that commanded the room. "Waitress? That tattoo. Delta 113, right?" Everything stopped. The diner, once filled with the low hum of idle chatter and the cheerful twang of a country song drifting from the radio, seemed to fall into a vacuum. The music died. The only sound left was the soft, electric buzz of the drink cooler. Frank rose to his feet with effort, his movements stiff but fueled by a sudden, unshakable purpose. Every person in the room became a silent witness, pulled into a story that had turned sharply, terrifyingly intimate. His boots thudded against the floor with deliberate weight as he walked towards Sarah. His eyes didn't leave her arm. "Frank, what are you doing?" Sandy, the manager, stammered. Her voice cracked high and thin, like it was afraid of the answer. Frank didn't so much as glance at her. He stopped in front of Sarah. She was frozen, wide-eyed, caught between fear and something even deeper. Recognition that she couldn't bear to admit. Frank looked down at the tattoo on her arm. Slowly, almost with a kind of ritual solemnity, he pulled up the frayed sleeve of his faded green jacket, then the cuff of the plaid shirt beneath it. His skin was weathered and creased with age, but there it was, the same mark. A shield, a lightning bolt, inked sharp and defiant against the years. "There were only 7 of us who made it out of Alcara Valley that night," he said, his voice thickened, weighted with the kind of emotion a man locks away for decades. He lifted his gaze to meet Sarah's. Her eyes were weedy and wet, her face a mask of shock and fear. "I was the gunner in the lead truck," he continued, the words landing like stones in the stillness. "The one that went up first. Where did you serve, kid?" And that was it. The wall Sarah had spent 15 years building, stone by stone, memory by memory, crumbled under the force of his words. A sob tore free from her chest, raw and unguarded. "The ambush on Rote Irish," she whispered, her voice quivering, her whole body trembling with the memory. I was the medic on the second truck." Frank's weathered face cracked. His lips shook. Tears welled in eyes that had seen too much and tried to forget all of it. "I remember. A medic pulling me from the wreckage," he choked out. "They told me in the hospital. They told me the medic from the second truck didn't make it." Sarah shook her head fiercely, tears spilling freely now. They got me out last, she whispered, her voice growing stronger with each word, as if she were climbing out of a pit she'd been trapped in for years. I was pinned under the metal. Frank, I thought you were gone. Your name, it was on the list of the fallen. Frank let out a broken sound, half laugh, half sob. They mixed up the dog tags. I was in a coma for 3 months. By the time I woke up, the unit was gone. Everyone was scattered. He inhaled shakily, then his voice dropped to a near whisper. But it was a whisper that carried across the silent diner like the boom of a cannon. You're the one who saved my life. You put the tourniquet on my leg. I've been looking for you. For 15 years. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Reality shifted. Everything people thought they knew about Sarah, the quiet woman with a scar, the one they whispered about, was upended. She wasn't just a mystery anymore. She was a hero. The change in the room's energy was palpable, seismic. Sandy took a slow step forward, her face pale, shame dawning like a sickness in her eyes. Her voice wavered, thick with regret. Oh my God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. My brother, he was in the army. She glanced at the photo taped to the counter, the one she kept there like a shrine. Her lips trembled. He came back, different, broken. For years, every time I looked at a veteran, all I saw was trouble. I judged you through my own pain. And I was wrong. God, I was so wrong. It wasn't just an apology. It was a confession, raw and human, the kind that hurt to say. Emily didn't hesitate. She rushed forward and wrapped Sarah in a fierce embrace, holding her like she could shield her from all the years of silent suffering. Around the room, the whispers changed their tune. We were awful, a woman murmured, voice breaking. The man at table 4 stared down at his plate, his face flushed crimson with shame. Then an older regular pushed his chair back and stood, clearing his throat. His voice carried across the stunned diner. That's not all, he said. Last year, when I lost my job, Sarah paid for my breakfast. Sarah Jones had spent an entire month quietly covering the cost out of her own tips. She never complained. She never said a single word about it. Yet the truth of what she had done finally spilled into the open, and the little Highway 29 diner seemed to transform into a kind of courtroom, a courtroom of silent, reverse testimony where every patron, every witness, now stood in judgment of themselves. Emily, who had been at Sarah's side from the beginning, took a deep breath and pulled out her phone. With a trembling thumb, she deleted the cruel, humiliating post that had started all of this. Then she snapped a new picture, a close-up of Frank and Sarah's matching tattoos, the silent emblem of a bond forged in fire and loss. Her caption was just 7 simple words. Our waitress, our hero, not horror, honor. It was as if those words broke a dam. Suddenly, the entire diner erupted. Chairs scraped against the worn linoleum floor as every person in the room rose to their feet, and the air filled with a wave of thunderous, sustained applause. It wasn't just noise. It was a chorus of apology, a wall of gratitude that wrapped itself around Sarah like a long-delayed embrace. Frank, his face wet with tears he didn't bother to hide, fumbled in his jacket pocket. His fingers closed around a small, tarnished brass insignia. He crossed the room, took Sarah's hand, and pressed the cold metal into her palm. It's about time I finally said it, his voice cracked. Thank you, medic. The applause swelled one last time and then faded into a reverent hush. That was when a man, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, unnoticed until now, stood up. He held up a laminated press pass. My name's Ben Carter, he said, his voice calm but carrying. I'm with the county ledger. I actually came here to follow up on a tip about a cyberbullying post coming out of this diner. His eyes flicked briefly toward the teenager's booth, and the shame there was palpable. But I think I've just stumbled on a far more important story. Would the two of you be willing to share it? What happened next changed the diner and the small town it served almost overnight. The story didn't just appear in Sunday's paper and vanish. It sank roots deep into the community and began to grow. By Monday morning, a new sign appeared on the front door, written in Sandy's surprisingly neat cursive. Effective immediately, Sarah Jones is our new shift lead and head of staff training. She will teach every new hire what real service and real character look like. It was more than a promotion. It was a public, permanent, and deeply personal act of respect, a daily correction to years of quiet disregard. Meanwhile, Emily's new social media post had taken on a life of its own. It went locally viral within hours and then began to spread across the region. Soon she followed it with a short but powerful TikTok montage, candid snapshots of Sarah working the counter, a screenshot of the Ledger article, and finally a lingering close-up of those matching tattoos. All of it played against an inspiring, wordless instrumental track. In just 60 seconds, the entire story unfolded, a story of patience, courage, and quiet heroism. The effect was explosive. The video was shared thousands of times. The original hateful poll was forgotten, buried beneath an avalanche of supportive comments from strangers who felt moved to speak. The digital tide soon spilled into the real world. By the following weekend, a line of customers stretched out the diner's front door. But it wasn't just for pancakes and bottomless coffee. They came for Sarah. They came to shake her hand, to thank her. A local baker arrived with a sheet cake iced with a painstakingly accurate replica of the Delta 113 insignia. A florist left behind an enormous bouquet with a card that read simply, "Thank you for your service and your silence." The diner itself became a living monument to Sarah's story. Sandy, working closely with Frank and Sarah, even updated the menu. Right at the top, in bold print, was a new breakfast plate, the Delta Hero Breakfast, a hearty spread of steak, eggs, and fried potatoes. Beneath the name, a small note explained that 10% of all proceeds from the meal would go to the National Association for Overlooked Veterans. The County Ledger headline, "Waitress's Scars Hide a Hero's Story," was quickly picked up by a statewide syndicate, and the story rippled far beyond the borders of their quiet town. But the most meaningful reward was still ahead. Frank, energized by a purpose he hadn't felt in decades, began making calls, sending emails, and using the sudden publicity like a beacon in the dark. One slow afternoon a week later, he pushed open the diner door and walked in. He wasn't alone. Two elderly men followed, their faces weathered and lined with years, their steps slow but steady. They scanned the room with cautious eyes until they found Sarah behind the counter. And in that instant, their expressions shifted, recognition blooming like a sunrise. They were the two Sarajevoans from the Alkarim Valley, men Sarah had mourned for more than 15 years, men she had believed were gone forever. At a quiet table tucked away in the corner of the diner, what once had been an unspoken wound began to mend. A broken family, one she had thought was lost to time and shame, found its way back to her in the very place where she had endured her deepest humiliation. Somehow, impossibly, life had come full circle. That evening, after the last of the customers had gone and the smell of coffee still clung to the air, Sarah Jones wiped down the counter with slow, thoughtful strokes. Her shift was nearly over when the postman walked in with a registered letter. It bore the seal of the national headquarters of the Veterans of Foreign Wars. She held the envelope for a moment, heart beating faster than she expected, before tearing it open with careful fingers. Inside was a letter she would never forget. It explained how her story, her shame, her courage, her survival had made its way to them through the news. At the bottom, in clean, simple type, were words that stopped her breath. "It's time to come home, Specialist Jones. It's time to come home to your Delta family." Tears blurred the edges of the page. That single invitation was more than recognition. It was belonging. It told her she was no longer defined by one night in a roadside diner or by scars she had once tried to hide. Her story, now out in the world, had rippled far beyond her own life. When she accepted the VFW's invitation, it wasn't to return to the same life she had left behind. This was the beginning of something new. She became an advocate almost by accident, a reluctant speaker who found her voice not in grandstanding, but in quiet, disarming honesty. She didn't stand before crowds to brag about battlefield heroics. Instead, she stood in school gymnasiums and small-town community centers. Her arm, once always hidden under long sleeves, now bared its scars openly, each line a testament to survival. She spoke of the unseen heroes who walk among us, of the crushing weight carried by those with invisible wounds, and of the dangerous power a single thoughtless judgment can hold. Her story wasn't just hers anymore. By speaking it aloud, she gave others permission to see the silent battles in the people around them, and for the first time to speak of their own. The effect was immediate and life-changing. Emily, who had watched Sarah with awe in the diner, abandoned her half-formed plans for business school. Instead, she registered for the prerequisite courses for a nursing program. Her application essay became a tribute to the woman who had quietly changed her life. "I want to be someone who sees the person, not just the patient," she explained to Sarah with a shy smile. Frank, who had spent decades keeping his memories locked behind a wall of stoic silence, finally found his voice. He started a simple podcast he called The Lost Tapes. With the diner as his unofficial studio, he dedicated the show to reconnecting veterans from long-disbanded units. He used his newfound local recognition to track down names and stories, piecing together friendships one phone call at a time. Each reunion healed a wound he had carried for years. Even the Highway 29 diner itself transformed. Once just a roadside stop, it became a haven. Once a month, Sandy and Sarah hosted an event they called Scars Tell Stories. It started as an open mic for veterans, but soon grew beyond that. Cancer survivors, accident victims, people who had clawed their way out of addiction, and those who had faced profound loss, all came to speak. The same space that had once carried whispers of cruelty now overflowed with applause and acceptance. Vulnerability became the language of the room, and each story was met not with judgment, but with understanding. On one such night, a boy no older than 10 sat in the front booth with his parents. Half his face bore the shiny, tight skin of a burn, and he watched Sarah the entire time she spoke, eyes wide with a mix of awe and curiosity. When his family prepared to leave, Sarah knelt so they were eye level. Slowly, she unclipped the tarnished brass insignia Frank had given her, the small, humble symbol of her own recognition, and pressed it into his palm. "These don't define who you are," she said gently, her gaze steady and kind. "They only prove you are strong enough to survive. Don't ever let them keep you from having a great future." The room erupted in soft applause as the boy left, clutching the medal like a secret promise. When the sound faded, Sarah's eyes wandered to the back of the diner. Near the exit, a man stood watching. Table 4. He didn't say a word. He only held her gaze for a long, silent moment, gave the faintest nod of respect, and slipped out into the night. One evening, long after closing, Sarah lingered by the front door, staring at her reflection in the dark glass. She traced the jagged scars along her arm, not with shame, not with regret, but with a quiet, steady peace. For the first time in 15 years, Sarah smiled. It was small, almost hesitant, but it lit up her face with a warmth that felt foreign after all those years. She whispered to herself, as though speaking aloud might break the fragile moment, "Maybe every scar is just waiting for the right person to read it." Emily was wiping down the last table in the quiet cafe, the soft scrape of the cloth against wood the only sound. She glanced up, having caught Sarah's words. Her young voice, full of unguarded hope, broke the stillness. "Do you think that day will ever come?" she asked. "When people finally stop judging others for what they've been through?" Sarah turned from her own reflection in the darkened window, her faint smile carrying both tenderness and the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "That day will come," she said, her voice clear, steady, and certain. "It will come when each of us finds the courage to speak our own truth and the compassion to really listen to someone else's." The room felt heavier and lighter all at once, as if the air itself had shifted. Emily held on to Sarah's words, letting them settle in her chest like a secret she wasn't ready to let go. Somewhere out there, countless stories like Sarah's remained unspoken, each scar a chapter no one had cared to read.